Welcome back to the Gen 10 Theater, and today is going to be part 5 of Can We Cram the Disney Canon into the Legends material and make them one. In this part, we're going to be talking about the comics. Now, I want to stress that I don't really read the comics, so I don't really have any experience with the EU stuff, so I'm mostly comparing these to my knowledge of the novels. But I'm sure this should be easy enough to know whether something should be kept or not. One very interesting thing I found making this is there's a YouTube channel that narrates all the comics, at least the Disney ones, called Star Wars Audio Comics. They are done so well that I would recommend them over the actual comics themselves. The first post-Disney buyout series was the self-titled Star Wars series from Marvel, which, confusingly enough, was the title of a later series as well. So we'll call this one the 2015 Star Wars series. Now, Marvel basically had exclusive rights for the longest time, and we're going to start with all their stuff before we get on to other people. In this series, there were 75 comics that were eventually put together in 13 and a half volumes. Now, I say half because there was a section removed between volumes 2 and 3 that were put together into something called Vader Down. So, what can I say about this series is, well, it feels a lot like a side story, with most of the characters nearly all being self-contained within the comics. That being said, I couldn't find much that really got in the way of the EU material, even with the amount of time hopping that is done going between the original cast of characters, some stories about Obi-Wan, and even some stories about Yoda. If you want the whole set, you'll have to get all 13 and a half volumes, plus either you can get issues number 31 and 32 separately, or you can pick up something called the Screaming Citadel Collection, which honestly is more of a collection of the Dr. Aphra books, but that is one way you can get all the material. The other self-titled set is from 2020, and this series is still ongoing. The beginning takes place right after Episode 5 on Bespin and starts talking about how Luke's lightsaber is found. But at the same time, it also says their explanation is just a vision. It goes on showing us another Order 66 survivor that tries to kill Luke, and really the series becomes borderline tossable already. But it even goes on further and starts talking about the Knights of Ren. Now, as I've said before, just because something exists doesn't mean it always leads to something else, but that's not the last straw that this thing breaks. What really gets this series the boot is when it starts to incorporate the Solo movie eventually, so this one has to go. The next one that I want to cover is once again one with a duplicate name. This is the Darth Vader series, but this is the 2015 one. Now, this whole series, which is spanned across 25 issues, can be had in one omnibus book that is 736 pages long. Yeah, that's quite a big textbook size thing that you could collect. This series kind of hops in and out of other series. It's intertwined with the 2015 Star Wars series, as well as the Dr. Aphra series. In fact, if you go for the omnibus and not just collect the individual issues, then you'll even have the Vader Down set with inside of this one. Now, this series takes place specifically between episodes 4 and 5, and it really doesn't get in the way of anything else, so this one can stay. In between the two self-titled series, there was a third Darth Vader series, which this one had a subtitle called Dark Lord of the Sith. This one also had an omnibus collection which has all 25 of its issues within one book. This series takes place right after episode 3 and introduced the lightsaber bleeding theory instead of having the red lightsabers be from synthetic materials, which is what comes in the EU. Outside of this very small detail in the subplot, the series is really about Vader hunting down the Jedi. So this one is optional if you want to look past the little small detail, because you have to remember that the old EU had a lot of conflicting small details throughout all the different books anyway. The third Darth Vader series, which is going to be from 2020, just like the other second renamed series, this one's still going on. This series is the story of Vader after his battle with Luke in Episode 5, and it kind of tells the story leading up to Episode 6. They're currently up to issue number 41, and just into the second story arc, which is only about issue 9 or 10 or so, it starts getting into the planet Exegol and the whole Final Order, the new Death Stars with the laser cannons on them. So, pretty much the series has to go. Next, we have another series that has the same name twice, the Dr. Aphra series. Now, the original one is pretty much what we discussed in the novels section, where this is basically what they took and turned into an audio drama, which then became a novel. So we kept it last time, so we're going to keep this series again. This leads us into the Dr. Aphra 2020 edition. And yeah, they seem to just start over a lot when they came to 2020. They just reused the names and went back to series or issue number 1. The only common thing with the 2020 series is they all seem to take place between episodes 3 and 5. And from what I can tell, this one is a very self-contained side story, and it can exist on its own without breaking anything else, so it can stay. A related series that crosses into the Afro series was the Bounty Hunter series. This one has 5 story arcs at the moment, and it was the third one that crosses into the Afro stuff. Now, this is a very action-packed side story sort of series that even includes the old EU character of Valance. He's basically the equivalent of the Terminator. When his face gets blown off, he's got like the Terminator, metal frame with the red eye. So, this one can stay. The Kanan comics we're going to cover very quickly. It's just basically a prequel kind of saying what he did as a Padawan. There's no reason this one can't be here at all, so we'll keep it. Then they did a series called The Age of, and there was 3 of these. Pretty much the Age of the Republic, the Age of the Rebellion, and the Age of the Resistance. So if you keep the Republic and the Rebellion and just toss out the Resistance, there's really no reason to get rid of the other 2. So that leaves us with the last of the Marvel comics, and they did a lot of either one-offs or very limited 5-print issue runs. And the first one we're going to talk about is the C-3PO one, which is focused strictly on, you probably didn't recognize me with my red arm. It goes into the story about his red arm. Or you're going to throw this one out no matter what because that whole thing was so stupid. But it also is leading up to the new stuff, and we don't need that in our lives. The next one about droids is called Droids Unplugged, and this one has BB-8 in it, so clearly this one has to go. The series about The Last Jedi clearly has to go, and the one called Beckett, which is a character from the Solo movie, also has to go. Then they also did movie adaptations in comic form, which, of course, we're going to get rid of all of that, except for anything related to Rogue One. So there was the Rogue One comic series, but there was also one called the Cassian and K2SO Special. That one can stay because, once again, it is just about the Rogue One stuff, and we've kept all of that. Then we have the individual character series, and we had things like Leia, Lando, Chewbacca, Han Solo, Obi-Wan plus Anakin, Mace Windu, Thrawn, Vader, Darth Maul, and then we also had things like the TIE Fighter series and the Fallen Order series, which all of that together is perfectly fine. The ones that don't fit clearly are going to be the ones about Phasma and Kylo Ren, and the one about Galaxy's Edge, which is also taking place during the Disney trilogy. And then there's also a series about Rise of Skywalker, as well as one called The Crimson Reign, which has a lot to do with the Disney stuff that we threw out. Moving forward to a different publisher, we have the IDW Comics, and theirs was just called Star Wars Adventures. Now, this series hops around between eras, kind of just intercut within itself, and it goes between all 3 eras. So, while you could technically pick this one apart and maybe have a couple issues from here and there, it's a lot of work, and you're probably going to miss out on whatever they're trying to tell you, so we're just going to throw this series out. Now, IDW also did a High Republic series, which was also called High Republic Adventures, and anything High Republic can fit because it's in its own timeline separated from everything else. And now that leaves us with the last publisher, and the circle is now complete, as Dark Horse Comics has once again become the master of Star Wars comics. And they haven't done a lot yet. They've only really done 2 main series. Just a quick mention, they did some sort of like Jabba the Hutt Halloween thing, but it kind of was a graphic novel, wasn't really a comic book. And it seemed like it was just a bunch of little side stories that were Halloween-ish. The focus of what they've done is all High Republic comics, which we've kept all the High Republic stuff. But the other things that they did was the hyperspace stories. And really, when you start looking into it, the first collection even kind of suggests when it's from Rebels to Resistance, it's going to cover everything between Original Trilogy and Mouse Trilogy. So that one has to go. So that's it. We've done everything. We've done the movies, the TV shows, the novels, the games, and now the comics. So what does that leave us with? Well, let's maybe wrap this up in one last 6th part where I go through and maybe just kind of see how much stuff we kept overall. Just going off of what I remember, we've kept a lot. So it kind of helps make this a little less depressing when you think about that the Disney stuff isn't all just tossable. Of course, that doesn't go off of opinion on whether the stuff is good. It's just, it can fit in with the old EU. So I'll see you in the final part where we discuss that. And until then, have a good one.